Some people have lost the day they were born. They seem to have the strings of life in their hands, but in fact, every step is taken in a story written long ago. They think they have made a choice, but fate has already made its decision. The story of Christopher Moltisanti is just such a tragedy. He was a boy growing up in the mafia world. Maybe he never wanted to be part of the criminal world, but sometimes wanting is not enough, because it's not who you are, but where you come from that molds you. He grew up under the wing of Tony Soprano. Tony was his mentor, like a father. But Tony wasn't just a protective figure, he was a shadow. Was he an idol or a prison for Christopher? It's not just Tony. Christopher tried to write his own life. He had a passion for cinema. He wanted to be something else. But fate wouldn't let him. He fought a battle all his life. Will he make his own way, or will he disappear into the darkness of the mafia? Now, let's look deeper into Christopher's story. Let us try to understand the world he was born into, his choices, and whether these choices were really his. Is man a product of the environment in which he is born, or can he make his own destiny? This question is one of the oldest debates in philosophy. According to Jean-Paul Sartre, man creates his essence through his own choices. But Sigmund Freud says that the individual is shaped by the subconscious. So which side did Christopher Moltisanti stand on? He wasn't born a gangster, but as a child he learned how his father died. He saw how his uncles and cousins were connected to this world. He looked at them and realized how life worked. He learned that this was the way to be strong, to be respected, to survive. Christopher's childhood was mapped out like a map of destiny. One of the most fundamental questions when talking about Christopher's fate is, does free will really exist? Jean-Paul Sartre says that man creates his essence by his own choices. According to him, we are a blank slate when we come into the world, and the choices we make us who we are. If Christopher were to be judged from a Sartrean point of view, then every mistake he makes would be the result of his individual choices. Just because he was born into the mafia didn't mean he had to become a gangster. He was interested in cinema. He dreamed of another life, so why didn't he step out of Tony's shadow? Because according to Sartre, the more one takes responsibility, the freer one becomes. But Christopher never took full responsibility for his own life. He always had excuses. He always blamed Tony's shadow, his drug addiction, his mistakes on external factors. The mafia led him astray. Tony manipulated him. Life didn't give him a chance anyway, so he fell into what Sartre called bad faith. In order not to face his own choices, he preferred to believe that others controlled him. But it is not enough to explain Christopher's situation only with Sartre, because there is also a system issue here. Michel Foucault says that the individual is shaped and controlled by the system in which he lives. In other words, free will exists only in theory. In practice, the world you are born into molds you. Christopher was born into a mafia family. His father was murdered. Everyone around him was involved in crime. From a Foucauldian point of view, Christopher couldn't make a choice. He was a product of the system. He thought he had a choice, but all of those choices were made within the narrow framework offered by the mafia. So could Christopher escape from this system? According to Albert Camus's philosophy of absurdism, the world is meaningless, and man must create his own meaning despite this meaninglessness. If Christopher was really a Camus character, he could have drawn a completely new path by saying, yes, I was born into this world, but I don't have to belong to this world. But he didn't do that because he couldn't handle freedom. It was safer to stay within the system than to step into uncertainty. Perhaps Christopher's greatest tragedy was that while he hated the system, he became dependent on it. He thought he was free, but he stayed with Tony. He had anger against the mafia, but he was afraid of losing his place in Tony's eyes. He wanted to go to Hollywood, but he couldn't give up the power and status the mafia offered. In the end, Christopher Moltisanti was trapped in an existential dilemma. He refused freedom because freedom meant responsibility. Like Camus's Sisyphus, he planned an escape each time, but in the end, he always returned to the same spot. He succumbed to what Sartre called bad faith and was swallowed whole by what Foucault called the system. And most painfully, even his death was not his own decision. Christopher's fate was sealed when Tony decided that his existence was now a burden. It was the ultimate demonstration of an individual's inability to live his own life. As he breathed his last breath, did he realize that he had never really made his own path? Perhaps that was the greatest irony of his life. He always sought freedom, but the greatest prison was the walls he built in his own mind. The story of Christopher Moltisanti is not just the rise and fall of a gangster, but the tragedy of man caught between free will and fate. He tried to get out of the world he was born into, but he was never truly free, because freedom requires courage and responsibility. And no matter how much Christopher rebelled, deep down inside, he could never risk leaving the safe prison the system offered him. Christopher Moltisanti's story shows us that the world you are born into may determine who you are, but who you become is shaped by your choices. But if you are afraid to make choices, you cannot escape becoming a product of the system that controls you in the end. Christopher wanted freedom, but he never had the courage to achieve it. That is why his story will be remembered as a tragedy that makes us question how real free will is. That's what most of us do. We hate our jobs, but we continue because we are afraid of change. A relationship consumes us, but we stay in it because we are afraid of being alone. We live a life that doesn't make us happy because we are afraid to take risks. The truth is that freedom is a choice, but not everyone can make that choice. Do you want to be like Christopher, or do you want to be brave and make your own path? If you think this video has helped you, leave a comment in the comments. What choices have you made in your life that were truly free? Or are you living a life that others have determined for you without realizing it? Share your thoughts, because true awareness only grows through talking and discussing. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.